Chapter 20. The Campus. "Where's D7? "That's the brick building near the south entrance. Looks like a train station."
"No, that's G7.
"Oh, right," Sprint said. "I'll never get used to this place. It's huge." It was Tuesday, which meant that today their duties revolved around delivering the mail. This was Jack's favorite assignment, as it gave him a chance to explore the campus. The place was so vast, he could hardly round a bend in one of the many pathways without seeing something new and interesting. There were greenhouses wrapped in vines like the crushing tentacles of some monstrous sea creature, buildings that plunged right down into the lakes, of which there were several, and even a glass tunnel with an impossibly huge fan at one end, which was apparently meant for training flyers. In the 6 weeks that had passed since the trials, he was increasingly amazed at exactly how big this place was, and the task of navigating it without getting hopelessly lost seemed an impossible one. "All right, so where's D7 then?" Willie repeated. "It's by the grove," Jack said. "I can show you. I'm going that direction too." "No, I'm good," Willie said, and he pushed his mail cart, which he was hardly taller than, out the swinging double doors. Jack turned to Maddie. "How about you? Where are you headed?" She slid a bin full of envelopes onto the lower rack of her cart without looking up, tugged down the brim of her patrol cap, and followed after Willie. "Life of the party, that one," Sprint said. "When she's not sneaking off to make phone calls, you mean?" Jack replied. "Yeah, what's that about?" Sprint asked. "It's at least 5 times a day. Who could possibly want to talk to her that often?" "Parents?" Jack mused. The thought gave him a sort of hollow feeling inside. With Dr. Walraven gone, and Alan completely indifferent to Jack's whereabouts or activities, he felt more than ever like an orphan, which, he realized with a pang, he now was for the second time in his life. It hadn't ever occurred to him that way. This had been more like being away at summer camp, an impression aided by the rows and rows of bunk beds they shared in the barracks. But one day, this would all be over. And then what? "Well, whoever she's calling," Sprint continued, taking the box Hoover was passing him and loading it onto his cart, "she sure seems to want to keep it secret. I walked in on her yesterday, and she just slammed the phone down, hung up on whoever it was." Still lost in thought, Jack simply shrugged and dropped a bin of envelopes onto his own cart. Sprint started, and he seemed uncharacteristically uneasy. "I just think since we're, graded as a team, maybe we shouldn't be keeping any secrets." Jack took his time in unshelving a large box. The conversation had been about Maddie, but he thought he knew what Sprint was really getting at. The day they'd arrived at the campus, Sprint had overheard him telling the woman at the gate that his house had been attacked, that someone had been killed. Since then, neither of them had mentioned it. How does one start a conversation like that anyway? But it had to be gnawing away at him inside, to know there was some deep, dark reason why Jack was even here. And then there was the key. As part of the whole complex history of the past 7 weeks, the key had remained Jack's secret. There was also the small matter of it having been stolen from the very facilities where it was now hidden. And what a terrible hiding place he'd chosen, the air conditioning vent behind his bed on the lower bunk. If anyone even suspected him, that was sure to be the first place they'd look. Well, the second, he supposed. The messenger bag he carried with him would be the first, which was exactly why he hid it. "Jack?" Blinking, Jack looked up. "Huh?" "You agree with me, right? About us being a team? About not having secrets?" Jack glanced at Hoover, who made an effort to look busy with a bin of envelopes. "Yeah, of course," he said finally. "Anyway, I better get going. See you in a bit." And with that, he tipped the box onto his cart and shoved it toward the swinging doors. It was mid-December and bitingly chilly despite the intense sunshine. Still thinking of the key, he hardly noticed, although the cold pavement was pleasant against his bare feet. But as he rounded the side of the building, he nearly tripped. Coming up the path right for him was Gray Company, one of Animal Control's top teams. Heroes were easy to spot. They were the only ones allowed to wear the Falcon emblem. Gray Company wore ash-colored uniforms with the falcon stitched in white across the chest. They were an imposing group. The smallest of them was Kenja Hawari, the cheetah woman from the trials, and with a rhinoceros following her lead, even she seemed larger than life. She met his eyes. Heart skipping, Jack thought again of the key, of that feeble hiding place behind his bunk. Could they have found it? Of course they could have. Were they coming to arrest him? Distracted, he steered the cart right over the edge of the cement path, nearly toppling it. He managed to keep the cart upright, but a few of the boxes tumbled into the bushes. Hawari and the rest of Gray Company walked right past, hardly seeming to notice him. Following just behind were their sidekicks, including the Letterman giraffe. "Nice driving, Porter," he said with a sneer. The others laughed. Jack watched them pass, feeling about as significant as the bush next to him, which was now ornamented in boxes at odd angles. Kelly Hall was bustling with the dinner crowd. It was everything Jack had hoped it would be, having seen pictures of it in some of Dr. Walraven's books. An open, well-maintained cafeteria where the heroes and staff of Animal Control gathered for meals. But he still wasn't used to being here, to seeing it in person. The place was amazing. It had a high roof with rafters like polished tree trunks, in which many of the climbers and flyers were perched. The seating area was wrapped in 2-story windows that looked out onto the same lake he'd seen on his first day, over which a soft purple sunset was fading. "I'm telling you, you need a catchphrase," Sprint was saying. He set his dinner tray on the table, scooped up his tail, and dropped into a chair. "All the best heroes have a catchphrase." "That's not a thing," Jack said, prodding his salad with a fork. "It is. Like mine can be, try to keep up." "That's terrible," Jack said. "Okay then, what's yours gonna be? You've just done something amazing, heroic. You turn to the onlooking crowd and you say..." Jack wagged his paws. "Ta-da!" Sprint rolled his eyes. "Mine can be, I hate walking," said Maddie. "My mail route went all the way around that lake up in the north corner of the campus." "Well, at least you were on the ground," Willie said, jabbing at his salad. "I was in that forest area. They have labs up in the canopy. I must have climbed 100 trees." He lifted his fork, showing a roasted beetle. "I felt like an insect." "Oh," Maddie groaned, pulling the brim of her hat down. "Speaking of insects..." "Well, if it isn't the bench warmers," said a pompous, boyish voice. Jack turned to see Cal approaching, his fellow apprentices in tow. "Rain, rain, go away," Sprint sang. "Muzzle it, Splint," Cal shot back. "I see your limp's gotten better. Must make it easier getting everyone's coffee." "I see your humor's gotten better," Sprint retorted. "Must make it easier getting everyone to hate you." "Listen, you puff-tail," Cal started up. "Careful, pet," Maddie interrupted, jerking her head past the groundhog. "Here come your masters." Jack followed her gaze. Grayson Conway and his team had entered the hall. Unlike Gray Company, or any of the other teams for that matter, Vanguard didn't wear matching suits, but casual attire with the Falcon logo simply printed on the fabric at either the chest or the sleeve. Yet despite their dressed-down appearance, every eye in the hall turned to them as they entered. "Carl," said Dixon, the wine-snob greyhound Jack had met at the Honey Sap. "You're late for training. Let's go." Cal jumped. "Yes, sir! On our way, sir!" "Shoo fly," Maddie said with a smile. Cal shot her a dirty look, and the apprentices followed their mentors. "How is that Undertale apprenticing for Firebird?" Willie seethed. "William, that's no way to talk about your superiors," Sprint barked. "Show Carl some respect." Jack and Hoover laughed. Even Willie betrayed the shadow of a grin. "Who has the pager?" Maddie asked. "It's in my bag," Jack said, indicating the messenger bag dangling from the back of his chair. Every team was given a pager so that they would know when their mentors were ready for them. The pager would buzz, a light at the top would blink green, and a little screen would tell them at which building to meet. Of course, for the Porter team, the green light never blinked, only a red one. Still, every time that thing buzzed, Jack's heart would skip, and he'd fish it out of his bag hopefully. Sprint spoke again. "So I was in line behind a couple staffers. They were talking in a sort of hushed tone, like they didn't want to be overheard. They weren't doing a very good job of it, though."
"What were they saying?"
Jack asked through a mouthful of dandelions. Sprint leaned over the table, as if to set this piece of information in the middle for them all to inspect. "They said animal control has been robbed." A sudden hollow feeling flooded Jack's chest, and he looked away with a shrug. He scooped up another mouthful, chewing mechanically. The floret suddenly tasted very dry. "Who could possibly rob animal control?" Willie asked. Jack privately considered that a slow old rat had managed. "Petrillo could do it," Sprint said. Jack stopped chewing and turned to look at the squirrel. He remembered Gale and the other boys threatening to summon the Griffin demon in Mrs. Punt's attic. At the time, it had been terrifying. Now it only made him laugh. "Petrillo? Petrillo's a myth." "No, he's real," Sprint insisted. "Hoover met a guy yesterday that's seen him." Hoover nodded vigorously. "Petrillo is just a story," Jack started, "that parents tell their kids to get them to behave. Stop hitting your sister or Petrillo will come take you when you're sleeping." "I always heard he punished crooked heroes," Willie said. "Heroes on the take or whatever." Jack shook his head in disbelief. "You really believe," he said, "that a griffin, a mythological creature, lives in the rooftops of Treyarch, beating up dirty superheroes without ever being caught or photographed?" "Well, I mean, you make it sound ridiculous," Sprint said. "But yeah, I do. There's weirder stuff going on than a griffin vigilante, to be honest. And anyway, I don't really care who stole it. I care what got stolen," he finished dramatically. "Okay, so what was it?" Willie asked, setting his fork down and folding his arms across his chest. Sprint looked around conspiratorially, then lowered his voice and leaned in. "Some kind of magical heart-shaped key or something," he said. "Not sure what it opens, but it sounds like if you touch it, you can read minds or something." "Hearts," Hoover said, his eyes widening in an expression of pure reverence. "That's why King of Hearts was called King of Hearts." When he didn't elaborate, the four others stared at him, and he looked down at the table. "He could touch someone and see what was on their mind," he said with a shrug. "What, you mean like who they loved or something?" Willie asked. "No," Hoover said, still not looking up from his food. "More like what motivated them. If they had evil intentions, he could see what those were. If they were being forced to do something, or if they had pure motives, he could see that too." Jack sat in silence, considering. Hearts. So that's what it was. When he had touched the president while holding the key, he'd seen a power-hungry monster. When he touched Maddie, he'd seen a frail kid, afraid of failure and rejection. It's what was on their hearts. "Okay, so a key got stolen," Maddie said. "Someone's, what, after King's stashed fortune or something?" "Dunno," Sprint said, "but it sounds like a pretty big deal. They were saying whoever took it, they're going to get banished." The others cringed. Getting banished meant being sent to live in Kersha, the carnivore-inhabited Badlands to the north. It was the harshest sentence, the capital punishment of Nicatia. Jack's mind went to the barracks, more specifically to the air-conditioning vent behind his bed. The first time an Anazopter, the dragonfly-like vehicles that flew heroes to their missions, passed overhead, he couldn't stop staring in amazement. Now, as they walked along the edge of the lake and toward the sleeping quarters, He gave only a casual glance as an annex chopped through the air just above them, its red and green lights blinking alternately against the night sky, its titanium wings beating loudly up and down. As usual, they were the first to return to the barracks. It was a single-story building, with a hall running between dormitory rooms filled with bunk beds. Heroes were housed in a separate village near the president's mansion. The barracks were for new recruits and guards, but the first room on the right was designated for the apprentice teams, 40 sidekicks and 5 new porters. Most teams were out late, either in training or tagging along on actual missions. Jack felt a swell of envy at the thought. For his team, the day ended after their chores, well before dinner. Jack entered the room first, patting the wall in search of the light switch. There was a flash of black. Something swung down from above the door. Before he could react, it collided heavily with his jawbone. He fell backward into the hall. The black mass swung smoothly over the top of him, like an ape through branches, then landed lightly on the carpet near his head. He rolled over quickly, rubbing his jaw. A dark figure was crouching cat-like on the floor, its head cocked sideways, considering him. And in its claw, it clutched the heart-shaped key.